Good afternoon. My name is Ivy Marimbe. I'm going to present on Introduction to Social Work, the role of social workers, the values, the laws that impact the social work. My historical analysis, which is the first section of the presentation, is conceived from an historical analysis that was done by Bray 2016. This is where he looked at the historical development of social work, how the social work profession interacted with other professions, and also how it transitioned from how it was in the past to the contemporary settings. And according to the Warwick University, it also gave a narrative that social services in Great Britain is centered on 6 key areas, which is the general social work, mental health, moral welfare, general health care, work with children and families, as well as social work within the education settings. My first section will be on the historical analysis, which looks at the 19th century. In 19th century, this is where the Poor Law Management Act 1834 was enacted, and this law established workhouses for the poor, and it also gives parameters on how they live, how they work, and how they get assistance. During this period, this is where charity organization, society movements were also established. Their focus was just to organize and provide an efficient help to the poor. They also focused on uplifting the morale for the poor and also teaching them on how to be self-sufficient. When we move to the contemporary practices within the same period, they started using modern case management, which looked at it was just a collaborative way of doing assessment and be able to establish the type of interventions that were required. These assessments were still centered around the charity organization society movements. In the late 19th to the 20th century, this is where settlement house movements were established. These settlement houses looked at helping people that were affected by industrialization, urbanization, or it could be mass immigration. And their aim also was to improve the living conditions in urban areas. And these reformers, there were some reformers who initiated these movements. One of them was Jane Addams. And then as we moved into the contemporary practices within the period, instead of focusing on specific areas, their interventions now were based on communities. And still, their approach or the system they used was centered around the settlement house movements. And when we move to the late 19th to the 20th century, this is where professional bodies started to be formed. One of the first ones was British Association of Social Workers. This was a merger of various organizations that were then put together, consolidated, and it became the British Association of Social Workers. And its aim was to establish professional standards, promote education, and also advocate for the social workers, which meant that before then there was no advocacy, there was no organization that would represent them or would voice for them. And then Institute of Medical Social Workers was also established. This one was mainly to then integrate social work within the medical settings. Since these organizations, it was established, they can't work in isolation. And also to guide on how the social workers were going to be trained, with an emphasis on integration between social and health. As we moved into 1965, a CBOM report was established. Its main focus was to advocate for a unified voice for social workers within the local authorities. And the second issue was to give clarity with a clear structure on the social work profession, its importance and the importance of training and education. When I moved to the late 1980s into 2000, this is where the Central Council for Education for Social Workers was established. Its aim was to set standards and approve programs or trainings that were done for social workers, and also to oversee the education of social workers, which means they needed now to standardize the trainings as well, so that the profession is also standardized. As we move into the 2012-2019, Social Work of England was established. The College of Social Work was also established. Then when I look at the historical analysis on the changes that relate to the contemporary practices, historically it started as charity organizations which were aimed at helping the poor. And as we moved into the modern practices, interventions were they now focused on the emphasis on empowerment, emphasis on advocacy, as in having the voice for both the movements, the social work, and the voice for the client as well. And then settlement houses were the first ones to be established. But then as we move forward, the communities were now involved. Communities were being engaged. It could be the individuals within the community or the community as a whole. So policies and any interventions being done were centered around the outcome of the engagement within the community. In the history, there was professionalization, which means the focus was on professionalism and making sure the institute is structured with ethical guidelines. But moving forward, the emphasis then shifted to evidence-based practices, which means that whatever decisions or interventions that were being made within the social services were centered on they had to research first, they had to do assessment first. There should be evidence for them to be able to implement a particular policy. There should be evidence for them to be able to implement or to set a particular standard. At the same time, technological interventions were also introduced, where the social services will be able to interact with various organizations, various platforms, so that information is accessed by the relevant agencies or bodies to be able to help the service users efficiently. Their approach is now all person-centered. And then, even as we speak now, the role of policies and implementation is very key. Whatever is being done is guided by the policies. Policies are being developed based on the changes within the person-centered needs, and the policies are then implemented. And when I move to my next slide, where I look at the role of social work, the impact of law within the social services, the law plays a very important role. It ensures the individual rights are protected and ensures that justice is served. The law also acts as a guideline for social workers, for them to be able to work within a very complex legal landscape. So the law also guides them. The other impact is the law also helps the social worker. It gives them frameworks and the basis for them to operate. Some of the laws that I've put on my slide, the first one is the Child Act 1989. This law basically defines the roles of all stakeholders within the courts and establishes principles relating to child welfare and parental responsibility. The Children's Act 2004, this is the act that introduced Every Child Matters framework, and its emphasis is to make sure that there is integrated cooperation to ensure that the children are safeguarded and their well-being is being promoted. The Care Act is the act that emphasizes on person-centered care and the well-being as well as prevention of any possible abuse. The Mental Health Act 1983 is the law that regulates the assessment, the treatment, as well as the rights for individuals with mental health challenges. The Equality Act It is the act, it is the law, it has consolidated all the anti-discriminatory acts to ensure that the individuals or protected individuals are not discriminated. This could be if we are blind, it could be your age, it could be sexual orientation. These are the rights that will protect you so that you as a person who is vulnerable, you are protected and you cannot be discriminated. Human Rights Act is to just ensure there is freedom for individuals and ensuring that the social services ensures the individuals' rights are protected. And then the role of social workers. Social workers, according to how I've done my analysis, I looked at 10 roles. The 10 roles include a social worker is an enabler. It means that they initiate conversations with clients to, irrespective of the stressful situations they are going through. They mediate. It means they are involved in resolving conflicts without any bias. Integration and coordination, it means all the parties or agencies that are involved, they come together in a very unified way with the aim of helping the service user. Manager, it means that besides dealing with the client, they also have to undertake administrative roles within the offices, which means allocating of resources, acquiring resources, doing assessments, ensuring that there is an effective and efficient structure within their setups. Educator, it means that they inform and they teach wherever there is clarity that is required. Their role is to make sure that the client, service user, they have understood before they even make any decision. Analyst and evaluator, it means they also make assessments before they make any interventions. They make assessment, they also do analysis so that they make informed interventions. Broker, it means they help to link different clients. It could be the police, it could be the communities, it could be the medical professionals. Social worker is the one who puts all of them together for them to be able to help a client. Facilitator facilitates, that is arrange for meetings to be able to initiate change for the client. Negotiator, social workers, they perform a negotiator role. This involves, they find the middle ground wherever there is a misunderstanding. This is their role so that there is a consensus within the decisions that are being made. Advocate, it means that they have to step in and speak on behalf of the client when there is need for that. Regulatory requirements, there are key regulatory requirements that are needed for a person to practice as a social worker. The first one is registration. So every social worker should register with Social Work of England for them to practice. But before registration, you need to have the required qualifications, an accredited degree or accredited diploma for you to be able to practice as a social worker. Once you have the registration, it means that you now are required to adhere to all the professional standards that are laid out, the ethical and professional standards. You have to promote the rights and interest of service users, meaning that whatever the person does as a social worker, they need to make sure the rights and interests of the service user are protected. Fitness to practice, meaning that as a social worker, you have to be fit for work. You have to be fit for work, whether it's physical or emotional. There are also systems set in place for social services to be able to assess whether you're fit for work or not, mentally or physically. Continuing professional development, this means that as a social worker, your learning is continuous. There are some courses, there are some trainings that you are supposed to attend annually, you are supposed to do annually or biannually. Those trainings it's a requirement that you need to be able to attend or do those trainings and then update your membership or registration as a social worker. So aside that, you also need to be developing yourself every other time. So there is continual learning that is required. Ethical conduct and integrity need to be professional. Practice in a very professional and professional with honest. Safe and effective practice is another requirement. They also need to comply with the legal and regulatory frameworks that are given for the country and for the social services. They need to be fit to practice investigation. If there is any need for a social worker to investigate, the person needs to have knowledge and skills to be able to investigate, be able to analyze, for them to make informed decisions regarding the interventions. Revalidation. Some of the trainings, they expire. The registration, it also needs to be renewed. So every required period, you need to be updating your registration, updating your certificates to be sure that you are continually up to date and you are registered according to the requirements. And then the differences in social work and social care sectors. There are three sectors. The first one is the statutory, the second one is voluntary, and then the third one is the independent sector. The statutory is also known as the public sector. This one, funding comes from the government taxes, and it is controlled by the government. In terms of the fees that people pay for the services, it's free of charge because it's funded by the government. The accountability is the public and the government. Voluntary is also known as the third sector. It's non-profit. This the funding for this institute is donations, grants, and fundraising. The control is usually controlled by the volunteers and the board of trustees within that organization. In terms of accessibility, when you want to access services from the voluntary sector, it might be free or you pay a very minimal fee. Accountability is the donors, the trustees, and the service users. And then the last one is the independent. This is a profit-making organization. These ones, they get their funds from the service fees, they get private investments. The control is the business owners or the shareholders within that particular organization. It requires, in terms of accessibility, you have to pay, and they usually charge market prices. Accountability is the customers and their shareholders. But all these three sectors, they play a very important role within the social work and social care services. My last slide is to do on the analysis and the main purpose and values of social work. The first value is acceptance, which means that the social worker needs to accept the client the way they are, irrespective of the race, irrespective of the age, condition, and any other thing. They need to be accepted as they are. Confidentiality, all the information regarding the service user should be kept as confidential as possible. Respect, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender or condition, then service users need to be respected, treated with respect. Self-determination, the role of the social worker is to advise. They are not supposed to impose. They should give the service user the right and the opportunity to make their own decisions, or they guide so that the service user makes informed decisions. Empathy, each time they are dealing with the service user, because they are going through a difficult situation, they need to be treated with empathy, putting yourself in their shoes for you to be able to understand their condition. Non-judgmental attitude, there is no bias, irrespective of the condition or situation. You don't need to be biased. Controlled emotional involvement, you need to remain dedicated and professional. No emotion should be used. The last one is resilient. Some decisions can be very tough, some decisions can be very difficult. No matter how tough it is, you need to remain professional, supportive, and face your fears as a social worker. I thank you. The last slides are basically the reference and the bibliography. Thank you.